Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this Taos Institute Dialogue with the Author. And we are here with Duane Bidwell and Marlene Ferreras. Thank you both for joining us today and hosting this event. And we are celebrating the launch of Duane's new book, After the Worst Day Ever, that really has just been published a couple of months ago. It's right there. So
can't really see it, huh?
yeah,
There we go. Thank you, Marlene.
Great. So we are here together for about an hour, and I will just pass it on to you, Duane.
Okay, great. So this will be very informal today, and we're just kind of Marlene and I will have a conversation about the book and the process of writing it and some of its implications and that sort of thing. It came out of a longer term project that I did with a pediatric nephrologist, a kidney doctor, interviewing children who have end-stage renal disease about their experience of hope, what they think it is, what they say keeps it alive, what members of the interdisciplinary treatment team do to help nurture hope and that kind of thing. So I know Sahar is not able to talk because they're in a public library. So that's okay. We can use the chat if you have questions or comments and that sort of thing. And I'll let Marlene introduce herself. Well, I guess I should also say I teach at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in the Department of Health Professions Education, where I work with the Veterans Administration to create a leadership curriculum for their educational executives. So Marlene, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Marlene Ferreras. I'm here in Southern California. I teach at La Sierra University as a professor of practical theology. I know Duane Bidwell because he was a professor of mine while I was going through my PhD work and served as the chair of my dissertation committee. I'm familiar with the Taos Institute and have participated when we were down in Cancun, and so know a couple of faces and share similar interests in terms of like relational research practices and social constructivism. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And maybe one thing I'll add is that while there are many things that I value having learned from Duane, I think this book in particular has been a real resource for me. I'm also the parent of a 7-year-old now, which is crazy. Crazy how fast time goes. But a 7-year-old who lives with beta thalassemia major, and actually coincidentally today is World Thalassemia Day, a day that's dedicated by our community to raise awareness about the condition, raise money to fundraise for more research, and also to encourage people to donate blood because of the necessity that many of the patients in our community and others who need blood product are. So that's a little bit about me, but I'm really looking forward to getting into conversation with all of us around Duane's really important work for us.
So we thought Marlene and I would be in conversation for a little while, and then we can open it up to discussion and so forth. So Marlene, I'm going to let you decide where we're going and when. We haven't rehearsed this, or she didn't send me a list of questions or anything.
No, so maybe you started summarizing a bit of your work, but maybe you could start there with giving us a brief summary of what was it that you did, and you did this over 2 decades. And decided to publish with Beacon Press. So maybe give us some insight into how we got this book and what's in it.
Oh, sure. So the research didn't happen over 2 decades, the empirical research, but I wrote my first paper on pediatric hope in 2001. So it's been a topic I've been interested in for a long time, partly out of my experiences of being a pediatric chaplain. Particularly in the neonatal intensive care unit and the pediatric intensive care unit, and with kids who are living with cancer. And then I became a parent, and the question of childhood hope became personal in a new way. And I experimented. I tried to learn about it and experimented with it with my kid and his friends, and identified some limitations to the dominant models of understanding hope that are out there, particularly from the psychological world. and decided I needed to understand more about how kids themselves framed things. Grown-ups tend to frame hope as a future-oriented concept, as a feeling or a virtue or a set of cognitive skills, particularly from the psychological model with kids. They see it as a cognitive skill. But a lot of the dominant theories assume skills and abilities that kids don't have in terms of executive functioning skills, in terms of an ability to project themselves into a future. And I got really curious because I knew kids were hopeful, but the theories didn't account for how they were hopeful if they couldn't yet do those things. So I worked with a pediatric kidney doctor to interview kids with end-stage renal disease who are receiving dialysis or who have been transplant recipients. And we chose the kidney kids, as we called them, for a couple of reasons. One is sick kids often hope for a cure, but there's no cure for end-stage renal disease. So these are children who can't hope to have a life in which they're termed healthy and they can go on and live a life like other kids. They are going to live with this illness all of their lives, and treatment itself creates a lot of suffering, side effects, and that kind of thing, and the psychosocial impacts of kidney disease with scarring on the body, body image, peer relationships, school, all of those sorts of things are also really significant. And researchers think of kidney disease as a paradigmatic chronic illness, meaning what people with kidney disease experience is what all people with chronic illnesses experience to one degree or another. So that by studying kidney disease, we get insights into the broader experience of chronic illness. So we talked with 51 kids who ranged in age from 11 to 18, and spent a lot of time with them, understanding how they articulate hope and what they say is important about it or keeps it alive. And that's what the book is about, the themes that came out of the interviews with the kids.
Mhm. Mhm. And could you say something about your choice to publish with Beacon Press and what you were hoping the book would do?
Sure. So Beacon Press is a trade press, not a professional press or an academic press. And we had published our work in academic journals and presented at conferences, but those venues are so limited in who has access to them. They're behind paywalls, and they're not written in ways that are accessible to a layperson. And I wanted to write a book that was available to parents and grandparents and kids and teachers and physicians and others. So Beacon was very interested in this. So it is a trade book, meaning it's aimed at an educated general audience, and not written as an academic tome or a how-to text. But it has lots and lots of stories of kids from the study in the book, and I felt a real responsibility. This was sort of the big motivation for going with Beacon. Was I felt a real obligation to honor the voices of these children and to let them speak. And it's not that they don't have voices, it's that we don't listen to them. So I wanted a publishing venue that would let the children be at the center of the story, rather than me at the center of the story.
Mhm. So you've identified 5 practices and structured the book according to like what was most prominent in the data, what came up most frequently. And the first theme was on realizing community and the power of community. And then you move on to talk about claiming power, attending to spirit, choosing trust, and maintaining identity. I wonder that as you discovered these themes as you're talking to kids, did any of them surprise you?
Oh boy. They were all surprising in some ways. You mean, did the themes surprise me, not did the kids surprise
No,
me?
no, no, the themes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Themes.
Um, uh, I um, I didn't anticipate how important community would be, that would be the most frequent category, because in philosophical and psychological and theological work about hope, we don't often talk about community. And what these kids taught me is that hope starts as a social resource. It doesn't begin as a feeling or a virtue or something inside of a person. It starts in our relationships and then it's internalized. And so the prominence of community and the importance of community, um, and community that is, I would say, authentic community, right?
Mhm.
Where we share the good and the bad, the entire story. Kids trust healthcare providers who tell them the bad news as well as the good news. If they're only hearing good news, they get suspicious. And so that one was a surprise. Um, Another surprise was in the practice of attending to spirit, the emphasis that the kids place on both congregations or communities, religious or spiritual communities, and the support they receive from those. The existence of a wisdom figure in the child's life, someone usually not a parent or a religious leader, but an aunt or an uncle or a grandmother or someone they've met in their religious community who teaches them spiritual practices, be it using prayer beads or spoken prayer or reading sacred text or serving others, that they really rely on that wisdom figure to keep their spiritual self attuned and together in the midst of illness. And another surprising part of that was how important material religion was to kids. And by that, I mean um, images, symbols, um, jewelry, cards, objects that have spiritual significance to the kids that they keep around them or that they use on a daily basis or that they reference often. So bringing a rosary to treatment or always, so there was one girl in the study who always wore her grandfather's crucifix to treatment because he had worn it when he was treated for cancer. And so for her, it had a connection to him and to spirit as a kind of almost a protective amulet. So, in retrospect, those things shouldn't have surprised me,
Mhm.
given kids and the way they look at the world, but they did surprise me that they were so important. And that category was surprising to me as well because the psychological and philosophical literature doesn't look at spirituality and its relationship to hope. And these kids, it's very important to these kids. And for those who bring it up, it's especially important. We didn't introduce it, but if a kid mentioned it, we would follow up, and some really, really rich stories and understandings came out of that. So I think that's one thing the book does is help expand our understanding of what's involved in hope.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And you make a distinction between what I think you term it authentic hope is
Mhm.
and other kinds of hope. Could you help us understand?
Sure. So psychologists make a distinction between optimism
Mhm.
and hope. And optimism is a sort of almost a Pollyanna-ish approach to the world, this assumption that everything will work out no matter what I do. And or I can wish that this will happen, or I worked hard, so I expect this to come to me. And hope is much more reality-based. It acknowledges limitations. It has multiple objects, so it's not a general orientation. It's more aimed toward a specific experience, and it is about hope occurs in particular places with particular people, more than just sort of this global the world is going to support me optimistic frame. So I think humans need both, right? But when you're sick, at the book launch, there was someone who talked about his brother who died of cancer, who got married on his deathbed, and always denied the fact that the cancer was affecting him. He refused to acknowledge that he was very ill, and how frustrating that optimism was for the family, and it didn't ever feel hopeful. And that's part of what these kids illustrate as well, right? You can't deny the illness. Your hope comes in the middle of the illness.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thanks.
Makes great sense. So I think the book has a lot of implications for like many things, but amongst them, like I'm thinking of, before we started recording, Alex was talking about this class that she's going to teach on the climate crisis, for example, things that we all struggle with, that where we can't get out of these relationships or things that are just in dis-ease, and we have to live with that kind of tension. I wonder, what's the import for um, folks who are doing therapy, seeing clients, or teaching in classrooms? Maybe imagine like how they can take your book and resource it in multiple different settings outside of the healthcare system.
Sure. So I think part of what these kids say to us is these 5 practices aren't specific to kidney disease, right?
Mhm.
But they're the parts, the building blocks for remaining hopeful in the midst of what you have called disease, or I would call unwellness. They understand that all of us are unwell in different ways at different times. That health isn't a steady state or an end goal. So how do you keep hope alive in the midst of all of the ways in which you're always not quite well, right? And the importance of community, connecting people to community who understand their experience and are able to help children interpret it and teach them about what's going on in this context in relation to whatever their distress is really, really important. And the part about claiming power, which is about both having power or agency in relation to the illness, but also in relation to the treatment team, right? That being treated as a subject who participates and makes decisions and not as an object who's receiving care. Um, those 2 things, I think, are the most important parts that educators and clinicians and policymakers and organizational development folk ought to emphasize. How do we build authentic community around this issue or around this experience? And how do we not just stand in solidarity with people, but
Mm.
help them claim agency or claim power in relation to the community and to the experience? What are the little things they do have some influence over, right? Um, rather than letting the experience or the illness define who they are.
Mm.
Um, so the attending to spirit piece, I think, is also important because we tend to think of human resources and coping as related to what humans can do, but these kids are always bumping up against the limitations of humans. They can't have ultimate power. They can't have a community that's perfect. And so when they talk about attending to spirit, they're talking about the transpersonal dimensions of hope and the way in which those transpersonal practices are a coping resource for them or help give them access to resources that they don't have and their community doesn't have. And that sounds very vague, I know, but it's an important part about coping. And it's closely, all of these themes are woven together, right? Like attending to spirit and claiming power are pretty closely connected, and community and attending to spirit are pretty closely connected. But so is, uh,
Choosing hope.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Um, and the choosing trust piece,
Uh-huh.
helping kids understand that they can trust their experience. They're not wrong or they're not less than because they don't think the way adults do, or they don't have the same information adults do, that they can trust their experience and trust the people around them to help them make good choices, I think is also very, very important. Um, the maintaining identity practice was the least important to these kids, but still important. And what that meant was keeping alive who they saw themselves as being before their diagnosis so that they aren't kidney kids who go bowling. They're kids who bowl and live with kidney disease.
Mhm.
And those are not new ideas in social constructionist worlds by any means, but they're not the typical way of thinking. And anything adults can do to help kids claim the identity that they prefer, that
Mhm.
the ways in which they knew themselves beforehand, and not be defined by their suffering or their illness, I think are really important.
Mhm.
Thanks for that question, Marlene.
Yeah, and that can be really hard too, right? Especially when you're thinking of chronically ill kids, like my daughter or even these kids, because you're constantly in the hospital context. You're constantly having to go for dialysis. What is it, like 2 or 3 times a week? Something like that, and just surrounded always with treatment team and diet protocols. So that makes it
Scars on your body
scars on your
and
body.
lumps under your skin, and yeah, diet restrictions, activity restrictions. Yes.
So how we talk about it also in conversation with kids, I think is significant as they're forming language and also their own understanding of themselves. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because I just saw something in the chat.
Yes, I think Sahar has asked a question.
She says, "Thank you for doing such valuable work, especially with and for children. I heard your works, for example, with kidney disease case, to confront kids' thoughts and positivity, negativity related to their scars on their body. How do they relate to their scars or physical appearance to their thoughts and hope?" That's a great question.
Ah, great. So we'll move into question
Yeah,
and
I guess so.
conversation.
Yeah, this is great.
Uh, um, yeah, so this is a question, Sahar, if I understand you, you're asking about the physical reminders, the scars on their bodies, that change the way they think about themselves and the way other people think about them, and how they relate their appearance and to their thoughts and hope. And great, I'm glad that's right. So kidney kids have all kinds of scars. Many of them have a port in their chest. Many of them have had multiple surgeries, so they have scars on their abdomen. Some of them have a port in their abdomen, so they have a tube that's sticking out all the time. Sometimes when they have a port here and they wear a low-cut shirt, everybody can see the bump under their skin. So they get made fun of a lot at school, at the pool if they're able to swim. A number of them can't swim because of the ports that they have. And one of the ways that they deal with that is the American Kidney Foundation, and I'm sure there are kidney foundations in other parts of the world, um, have summer camps for kidney kids, where they can receive treatment and go to camp and do everything that normal kids can do. And what the children tell me is it is really important to be in a community of kids who have similar physical scars and experiences. That is, they make friends and they're able to text each other and email and video call throughout the year, knowing that although they get made fun of at school in the dominant culture, there's also a culture that understands and accommodates and doesn't see it as odd. In fact, they'll compare scars and that kind of thing. Um, so maintaining identity is pretty closely aligned with the scarring and the physical artifacts that exist because of their illness, because it is important for them to remember who they are apart from their bodies, that the activities and skills and relationships that they have used to define themselves or that are important to them don't change because of the illness. There's a story in the book about a kiddo who he got made fun of at school often. And his coping mechanism for that was that he and his cousin would trap one of the people on the elevator and beat them up, to communicate, you shouldn't make fun of me. So, not the best coping mechanism in the world, but it's one, right? And but he had a transplant and started at a new school, and he was present because he had a transplant. He didn't need to miss school for dialysis. And then the transplant failed. And he was going late to school 3 times a week, and he was falling behind in his schoolwork. And he had a new port in his chest that people saw during physical education. And teachers didn't believe him when he said he was sick. They thought he was skipping school or something. So his response then was to ask the principal to have time at a school assembly to talk about his illness. And he prepared an educational slideshow for teachers and his peers, including explaining the scarring on bodies, and then told them what kids with kidney disease need from them in order to succeed in school. And that was a really powerful way of claiming power and being authentic in community and redirecting attention to I'm not a bad kid. Here's before you knew me, I was a football player. I wanted to be a police officer. I planned to join the army. And now I have this illness. And here's how you can help me. And eventually his school district asked him to serve on a committee about how to work with kids with chronic illness, how to make the educational experience better for them. So at its best, the scarring and so forth becomes a motivation. It also becomes a way to connect with people rather than to push people away. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Sahar. Oh, great awareness in the principal and teacher story. Do I agree with separating scared kids or scarred kids from public communities, for example, summer camps? I don't think of it as a separating, like here you go do your own thing because we don't want you around, as much as it is, in identity theory, identity development theory, there's this idea of a peer group or a cohort group that kids need a cohort of others with a similar experience in order to feel safe and in order to internalize the resources they need to cope better in a world that doesn't look like them. So I think there's real benefit to it for the kids who choose to go, right? And I did encounter kids who went to camp once and said, not for me, but most of them said that was the most fantastic experience because it was the first time I felt like I was in the majority. And our son is adopted, he's Vietnamese, and we would go to Vietnamese heritage camp in the summers where it was the only place in his life where all of the kids looked like him and all of the families looked like us. We weren't a conspicuous family. And those experiences and those relationships, now that he's an adult, are still really important to him. For that reason, he was able to develop a sense of identity with others who experience similar things, rather than always being the odd guy out kind of thing. So, what else? This is great.
Yeah, I'm saying I'm shaking my head because my daughter too, she's both adopted and has thalassemia, and going to thalassemia family camp was huge for her, especially when she met another adoptive child with the same condition. It's it's like having conversation with someone and not having to explain everything. You start with things in common and it doesn't just normalize it. I think that it makes you also feel community, right? Feeling like others are in proximity to your experience. Yeah.
Well, and
Sorry,
one of the
can you explain what thalassemia is?
Yeah, see. So my daughter just did a she did a 30-second video, and this is partly, one of the things I'm really grateful for this book for is that it's helped me be more intentional about what's helpful for my daughter, so that I do those things on purpose, as opposed to maybe stepping back and finding, oh, that was important, I should do more of that. It's just really helpful, right? So since reading Duane's book, I'm trying to help her to engage with her community and to find some ways of um, taking control, right? Having some agency. So she did this little 30-second video that's up. But thalassemia is a blood disorder where it's a genetic condition that you don't produce hemoglobin. So she needs blood transfusions every 3 weeks in order to sustain life. Yeah. Yeah.
I would love to see her video.
It's on the Thalassemia Foundation page. So it says my 5-year-old, sorry, I'm looking at the chat now. It says my 5-year-old has a scar on her forehead. We did laser, still it's there, and I'm educating myself how to raise her strong and acceptance of her beauty.
Lovely.
Yeah. I think what this comment also raises, Duane, is gender. And you talk a little bit about the differences in your book between the girls in the study and how they approach identity, and the boys. And you also talk a bit about race too, and in community, the different ways that people are shaped within different communities, and their internal resources as individuals are really turning outward as part of that. So maybe you can comment a little bit too about the nuances between girls and boys forming identity, and some of the unique challenges with that.
Yes, and I'll preface that by saying the racial ethnic differences and the gender differences in hoping in these kids are one of the reasons I don't think it's possible to have a universal theory of hope.
There you go.
Right?
Yep,
That
absolutely.
that hope is local. It shows up, it dances to its own rhythms, it has its own taste, its own smell. And so you have to get to know the individual when you're talking about hope. You can't generalize. And for girls, claiming power was especially important for girls. And they tended to mention it more often than boys. In a similar vein, choosing trust was more important for girls than for boys. And attending to spirit was way more important for Black and brown children than for white children, which is very consistent with research about the role of spirituality in those communities, right? So it is helping people tap into the resources from their communities and acknowledging that there are different sorts of gender, like maintaining identity was something that was really important to older boys, more so than some other things, right? They emphasized that, and it was less important among younger children. So age also made a difference, right? Hope is dynamic. It shifts and grows as someone develops, and we are all always developing, right? There's no end point in our development as human beings. And so helping people articulate the sources of hope or the things that make a difference at the moment where they are is really, really important. So thank you for raising that. Yeah.
Yes, because age is the other thing. I'm just wondering well, you said the age span. Sorry, I heard 18, but the lower age was
11.
11. Yes. So, I mean, I'm also curious about what differences there were as they began to understand more, or of
Yes.
course that would vary
It does
between
vary.
ages.
And one of the challenges with pediatric kidney patients is they age out of pediatric care, and
Oh goodness.
they have to learn to advocate for themselves in the adult healthcare system. So
Hmm.
there's a big part of the treatment team is teaching the kids about the illness, helping them and know and understand what's happening, and giving them the tools to advocate for themselves when they're no longer a part of pediatric care. And there's a story in the book about a kid who was watching his doctor look at his lab numbers, and the doctor frowned, and the kid says, "You're angry." And the doctor said, "I'm not angry. I'm concerned about some of your numbers." And he says, he's 16. He says, "What do you see?" And she says, "You come here, look at the numbers and tell me what you see." So she lets him look at them. He turns around and he says, "My potassium is low, but it doesn't seem like a big deal." And she says, "It's not a huge deal right now, but there's a trend. Last time you were here, your potassium was low, and now it's even lower. And so we need to do something to change that. What would you do?" And she made him articulate what he thought needed to happen in treatment. And then she said, "Yes, that could work, but here would be the problem with that. So I think we should do this instead. Which of the two do you want to do?" Right? She was teaching him to think about his body,
Mm.
his health, his life, and to claim power in relation to the treatment team and the disease, to make sure in 4 years, he's no longer going to be able to receive pediatric care. He's got to be able to do that later. And so for a physician, especially in a healthcare system where, you don't want to spend more than 15 minutes with a patient, for a physician to say to a child, "Look at your lab numbers and tell me what's going on, and now tell me how we can address this," was really powerful.
Yeah.
More physicians and healthcare workers ought to do that. The relationship between them was really important, and that's part of why he could trust his healthcare team, right? They didn't just say, here's what we're going to do to you or for you. They said, help us understand what you understand. Let's lay out the options and make choices together. So the relationship was essential to that. Yeah.
That's very moving indeed.
Indeed.
So useful. I'm just aware, thinking of other layers. I mean, I'm in Britain where we have a national health service, and there's no question of paying for any of these services. But what
Yes.
happens when I don't know when these children go into the adult world and may or may not get health insurance? How do they negotiate that?
Yes.
How
And
does that work in helping people be advocates and what their families can do or not do?
yes. And some of the kids in the study are undocumented. So they're not
Oh,
eligible for
wow.
public support in a lot of ways, or their parents can't afford insurance, and money and the sense of being a burden on families is something that kids are quite aware of. There's one kiddo who said that his hope was that he could graduate from college and get a job to pay for his medications. Right now, that's an indictment of a system that's his hope that I can afford my medications, but they have to learn to navigate that system. And part of the teaching them to do that is teaching them how to keep themselves as healthy as possible. But there are hospitals that actually take kids who have a good understanding and not use them, but invite them to go on a trip to lobby for better funding, for healthcare reform, for policy, and that kind of thing. So a part of what the healthcare team does or the treatment team does, even along the way, is teach them how to make a difference in access to resources and other things. And there's a girl in the book who is undocumented. She needs a transplant. She can't get on the list for a transplant until her family can demonstrate they have the cash to pay for it. Her mother is a housekeeper. She has to rely on Medicare vans to get her to dialysis, which means sometimes she's late and sometimes she misses dialysis. That's a really crucial situation. Yet she says, I want to become a kidney doctor in Mexico, where my family is from, because I understand what the challenges are. And I had to come here because I couldn't get sufficient treatment in Mexico. So my goal is to make it easier for other people. Many of them have a real sense of responsibility to their communities and a sense of having special knowledge or wisdom or skills because of the illness, that they know things other people don't know, or they can be trusted in ways other people can't. And they want to be teachers, they want to be healthcare workers, they want to be politicians, and bring that wisdom to others. So there's an activist spirit in some ways among some of these kids, but it's much more focused on interacting with people one-on-one than on systemic change at this age. And I was going to say, Sahar, in response to you, a lot of these kids, the reason those relationships with camp and so forth are important is they mentor each other during the treatment process. Someone who's been in dialysis for 8 years sees someone new come into the dialysis unit and says, hey, let me teach you what this is like. Let me teach you skills for managing your anxiety. Let's talk about what it's like to live with this disease. And in the units where kids are most hopeful, the staff actively encourages that kind of mentoring and relationship building between kids. That's really important, and funding doesn't cover that kind of thing, right? We need people who understand the educational and social dimensions of the illness in order to make those a part of the treatment process, not just an adjunct to or an accidental experience. What else?
That is very moving indeed. No, I was thinking, well, once again, sorry, as one does, one extrapolates to one's own situation.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have a chronic blood cancer, which is not particularly serious in my case. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which you're on watch and wait for ages, and there's been huge changes and things. But what has been most useful, and thinking of community, there's a Health Unlocked community for CLL, as my chronic illness is called, and I think of it, I mean, it's worldwide. So you have people from America, from the UK, Australia, well, and other countries where English isn't necessarily the first language. But I think of it as this giant reflecting team, that is able to, because people tend to ask questions, and people come back and give support in various ways. There's very, very good moderators and administrators, because sometimes you get, well, actually, that wasn't a very useful comment to make, and then a little tussle breaks out again with people commenting. But in the whole, it is just so warm and engaging and accepting and encouraging. I think the thing for me reading it, and I think this is what I was wondering with the children, is what happens when things do go wrong, when someone gets very ill or dies, and they are part of that community. And certainly, I know as I get closer to treatment myself, I look at some of the scary things. I was very interested in you saying the balancing the good and the bad, and how that's talked about and dealt with. And the time it takes to begin to accept the risks. I mean, they say, oh, well, it's so simple now. We've got these new drugs and it's so easy and it's just a pill a day and yada, which, my hematologist tends to say. But then you read people's experiences and it's very different for every person. And these are very powerful drugs, and goodness knows what they can do to you. And, one might be lucky or one might not. And so, yeah. So, yes, I mean, huge amounts of hope through community, but also, I think, so every now and again you get someone saying, oh my God, I just realized this is I'm so frightened. This is, just awful. And then, of course, there's lots of discussion and talk about that. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm warbling on about this, but so what happens to the children when the bad happens, the difficult?
Yeah. Ideally, they have professionals and community members who can help model for them a way to accept the bad things, to not ignore them, but also not see them as defining everything. These kids in the book, they understand that their lifespan is limited. A kidney kid usually dies, before they're 30. Particularly if they were diagnosed as an infant or a young child. A kidney transplant, which is the best possible treatment, a transplanted kidney only lasts about 15 years, and then they need another. Really? So they understand that their lifespan is truncated. That's one of the reasons I wanted to study these kids, because even the extent to which they can project themselves into the future isn't the answer for their hope, right? So they see hope as in the now. Now, hope for these kids is a present-oriented concept, that even when things are bad, there are things that keep them hopeful. And they recognize, they wouldn't use this language, but they recognize that you can despair and hope at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? They don't see them as in opposition. So they're able to say, honestly, I feel horrible and I'm grateful, right? And those kinds of things. So they talk about death pretty freely, because they all know someone who's died, or they've all know someone whose transplant has rejected, or they all know someone who's gotten an infection from their port. And that is a part of everyday life for them. So they learn about hope in the context of that stuff. It's not apart from. So when they say, I value a doctor who tells me the bad things, they mean I need good information. I need all of the information in order to make decisions. Because if
Yeah,
all I hear is the good stuff, I don't believe it. And I'm also not prepared when the bad stuff does happen. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I'm aware that we're coming up on the end of time, and I'm curious, what's the biggest takeaway for you all today? What are you going to take out of this conversation and chew on or implement or explore?
I don't know, Sahar wants to write something. I've been writing notes as you've been talking. What I've suddenly realized I can access Word, and so I've been typing away much better than scrolling. I mean, I also, well, I'm an older adult as well. Oh, Zahar, wonderful. We can see you now. You can't talk yet, though. No, because as well as one is aging. So, I mean, that's, and in fact, I'm teaching death, dying, and bereavement to psychology clinical doctoral trainees on Friday. And I mean, I'm there as a systemic psychotherapist, but I'm also there as an older adult, you know, and at 80, which I am now, one is always working, well, living with or in community with friends or relatives or others who are either suffering. Well, you know, it's the lottery of what happens to us as we age, or as I mean, we are all going to die, as your children are, and some people die very quickly and some not, and it's how does one position oneself with people when that's happening. You know, and I mean, now it is not as a professional in my case, it's as a friend. But I guess I'm very curious, Marlene, what you said is that reading the book has allowed you to consciously do certain things for your daughter or with her.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm adopted as well, but I don't think. Yeah, I don't think the CLL comes from that actually. But anyway, sorry. So I'm curious what conscious things now you do that you wouldn't have done without reading the book.
Yeah, well, it's connected to some of what I hear you commenting on, right? So I adopted her when she was 2. And my mother, especially, I'm not saying that this was just my mother, but she goes with me, especially when there's like these long meetings at the hospital with her hematology team, and it's combined with a transfusion and so forth. But we often felt a lot of concern that my daughter would be hearing the doctors talk very disparaging about the condition, or some things that were scary to me. Like, for example, what can happen when you have so many blood transfusion and you struggle with iron overload, and the burden that it does place on your other vital organs like your liver and your pancreas and your heart. And we go every 6 months to, you know, see this graph of how we're doing and assess what the side effects are. And I used to just like think, I need to remove her from this conversation. She can't be hearing this, because how is she going to play and be joyful? And I think, you know, listening to these kids and the way Duane has helped me to hear how it is helpful for them to have some level of transparency where they can trust and know that you're giving them the truth that they already know in their body. That's the crazy thing, is I was thinking, like, why am I taking her out of the room when she knows when she's fatigued? She knows when she wakes up in the morning and she doesn't feel like doing anything. And she certainly doesn't have all the language that Duane and the nephrologist and others around have, but she knows some of it that those of us who don't have thalassemia don't know about it. So I think just encouraging her to be part of it and understanding that as she's hearing these conversations, she's part of the treatment team. She needs to learn the language of the medical system. She needs
I
to,
love that.
right? She needs to hear me ask questions. She has to see me also push back, right? And maybe also in my own face, see that, to be honest, sometimes I am terrified. And maybe that's helpful in some ways, so she can see that, hey, I'm not always courageous. Sometimes it's kind of mixed in with terror, and we're going to keep going with this thing. So just living life together, I think that's one way in which the book has just given me the courage to keep my daughter in the room, and knowing that that's actually contributing to something that's really vital, especially as she moves into being responsible for her own care, because thalassemia is probably going to be a part of her life for as long as she lives.
Thank you.
You're muted, Duane. I hear your voice. Yeah, I see his
Sorry,
but I'm
here
not
I am just talking. I said, Sahara, it's good to see you.
Good
Did
to
you have
see
something
you
you wanted to
all.
say?
Yeah, good to see you all. Thank you so much for this meeting. So useful for me personally as a mother, that I told you, for my daughter, and also for my work, because in the beginning I hear how decades you worked on your work. So I have like 7 years of interviews and all emotional ups and downs on the work, and then you are now like a role model to just wrap them up. You have worked more than me, and you still dig into your work. It's okay if a work take a little bit longer than what you thought. Oh, I'm gonna write or finish the book, finish the research part in this episode of time. And about my daughter, your sentence was so key, like so highlighted, like aha moment for me, when you said hope is not universal. You need to interpret it and find it based on the community the child is raising. So my daughter is a trilingual, French, English, Persian, and she's going to these 3 communities. So yeah, now I have a concept to work and to see, okay, how these 3 communities are dealing with the issue, and how she is dealing with the issue in those 3 communities. Yeah, it was beyond useful to me to this meeting.
I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you. Alex, how about you? What resonated with your work?
Yes, thank you. What struck me for me is when you mentioned that maybe as adults we associate hope with the future focus and hoping for something. And I get the sense from hearing you talk that, especially when you said that hope and despair can happen, can be together in the same moment, and that's very powerful to hear that, and to maybe spread that message that hope is not necessarily meaning having the longest life you can have, or having that future goal. It can be something you feel and experience in a moment, rather than a tangible or a checklist, or something more practical. That was really powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, hope in the midst of the bad stuff, not instead of. So, well, I know we're at the end of time, so I am so grateful to all of you for being here today. And it when you write, as you all know, and you send it out in the world, you never know how people respond. So it's lovely to hear your responses and to see your faces, and engage in conversation about work that you don't know if it's important or useful or worthwhile for others. But
certainly. I think also
honored.
you're talking about the spiritual as well is very important.
Thank you. And thank you, Marlene, for being in conversation, for asking good questions and so forth. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Definitely very important work, Duane, and very inspiring conversation. Thank you, Marlene and Sahar and Eleanor, for participating today. And so we have recorded the conversation, and for those who couldn't join us live today, I really encourage you to share the link. It will be posted in the Taos Institute Commons online community that's open and free for everyone to access. It's also on the YouTube channel. So that's, nowadays a way that many people access these conversations, very valuable conversations. So please feel free to share freely. And Duane, good luck with the continuation of your book launch,
you.
and we hope it reaches many, many people.
Thank you.
very
Thank
much,
you all very
everyone.
much.
Take
care.
Thank you.
Yes.
No, I can on the YouTube channel that could be shared with people outside of Taos.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. I know many people who this could be of great use to.
Wonderful.
Great.
So thank you.
All right.
And
Have a wonderful week, everyone.
If you want to share your contact information, Duane, and if you're open for people to contact you, you can also put that in the comments on the
Sure. Put that in the comments. This is my personal email address. So there you go.
Thank you so much,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.